Hey everyone, it's Professor Snard here checking in as we continue to get a little bit deeper into our English 1102 course and a little deeper into the term. And of course, because the term is so short, it only takes us a few days, and now we find ourselves really into the content part of what we're doing. And in fact, what you'll notice is if you look at kind of our units taken as a whole, everything from here on in, starting with Unit 2, really sort of feeds in. In fact, you probably back this up even to Unit 1. But really from Unit 2 on in is sort of scaffolding. It's all related stuff that we're doing. It's not really we finish one thing and leave it behind and move on to a next thing and then a next thing, etc., etc. So these are all related. So the big picture, and you can jump into any of these units right now and see the exact details. Obviously, we'll get there when we get there, but it's good to understand sort of what we're doing here. So you're going to be doing two kind of parallel or related things. Again, big picture for this course. The one, which seems simple enough, but we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about it and really doing it, is you're going to write a professional email. And again, it's all sort of explained, like who this would go to and what the purpose is and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to get into that here, but you're going to be writing a professional email. And what we'll learn actually as part of Unit 2 is that those tend to be fairly short. So if you were expecting to do a big research paper in English 1102, that's not going to happen. The research paper is not a particularly useful genre or one that you're going to find yourself writing like out there in the real world. But anyway, that being said, the writing that you're going to do that's going to actually go out to a real person in the world, you're going to figure out who this is, you're going to figure out like why you're writing it. That'll all come a little bit later. But it's a fairly short document. We'll spend a lot of time working on it, but it's relatively short. So that's kind of like the one side, or one of the two tracks that we'll be working on simultaneously as we get deeper into the course. You writing your professional email that you're actually going to send, hopefully get a response back and learn something, or maybe change a policy, or understand something better, you know, whatever it's going to be. So that's kind of like external to the course, or it's writing that's going to go outside of the class to an actual, you know, audience or someone who's going to get it. Internal to the class, and really the bigger writing project, or where the main kind of word count comes from for our class, is the bibliography that you're going to create that sort of goes along with that professional email. So there's going to be two main writing projects that we do, again, through these various stages of our class. The shorter professional email, the longer, more developed annotated bibliography. We're going to start it a little bit in Unit 2 here. We're going to build it in stages. But it's important to understand like the bigger picture here. The reason we're doing this is to really put into practice the basic concepts we started with in Unit 1. And those two fundamental concepts for English 1102, and the ones that I think are the most important for our class, are the most transferable, like useful in any other class that you might take, most transferable to any personal, you know, life situation, and also, of course, professional situation that many of you either are in now or will find yourself in, you know, at some point in your life, whether it's like a job, a thing that you're doing, or a career, a thing that you're really looking to do long term that kind of reflects your passion and interest. So those two concepts are the rhetorical situation and then discourse community, and those two things are clearly related. So like we learned through Unit 1, the rhetorical situation is kind of like the easier of the two to understand because it's a small, relatively small thing. It doesn't mean it's not complicated, but it's just easy to imagine. So that rhetorical situation, sometimes called the rhetorical triangle because there's three parts to it, involves a sender, a message, and then a receiver. And the terminology we use is really kind of irrelevant to me. It doesn't really matter. The sender you could call the rhetor, right? The person who's making the rhetorical argument. The message could be, sometimes it's called like an artifact or a product, right? It's that thing, whether it's digital or print. And it could be a whole range of different things. A tweet is a kind of message or rhetorical artifact. A website that you might build, a brochure, an essay, right? They're all things, the physical product that the rhetor, the sender of the message, creates. And then the receiver, obviously, is the audience. Sometimes that's one person, sometimes it's a group of people, sometimes it's just a named entity like like a department in an organization, whatever it might be. So it's fairly simple, and we find ourselves in these all the time, every day. Some are really informal, like you're talking with a friend. That's a rhetorical situation. You're the sender, your speech is the rhetorical act, right? That sort of product, and obviously your friend is the receiver. We don't even really think about it in those terms. It's just something we do every day. Sometimes they're much more formal. Maybe you're interacting with the boss. Maybe you are, like we're going to do in this class, writing a professional email. So you're the author. The professional email is the artifact or the thing that you're creating. And obviously the audience is going to be determined, the person who's going to receive it is going to be determined by you as part of the steps that we're going to go through. So a fairly simple concept, but actually really complicated, because what we'll notice, and actually Unit 2 will help us to understand this, is that we modify how we function as senders or creators of those messages, as rhetors, right? People who create arguments. We modify how we do that based on the rhetorical situation. And we all do it, even though we're not always all intentional or cognizant about it. And the main thing that I want you to take away from this class is to notice that we're always in these rhetorical situations. You are always making adjustments for it, whether you're thinking about it or not. And the more intentional you can be, especially when it's kind of like higher stakes rhetorical situations, the more intentional and sophisticated you can be, the better, like sort of period. In your professional life, it'll get you further. I don't want to get too crass, but usually more sophisticated rhetors are more successful kind of in the organizational food chain. You're making more money. You're feeling more sort of empowered. In your personal life, you'll find this is really effective. And I don't mean like you can now convince your friends to do things that they didn't want to do, although that might be a fun side effect. But just taking care of like basic family finances, for example, that the more sophisticated you can get as a sort of critical reader and intentional rhetor, the more successful you're going to be. And that might sound really like pie in the sky, or kind of like, why is this guy even talking about this? As we get deeper into the class, hopefully you'll actually begin to see that that's the truth. And you'll experience it too. And then obviously in your academic life, you're in rhetorical situations all the time. You're creating assignments for classes, you're doing various things with your peers, interacting with instructors, interacting with other components of a campus, whether it's like financial aid, counseling, advising, learning commons, the library, the billion things that we do, right? The more kind of, again, sophisticated, intentional you can get as a rhetor in those situations, the better. And it doesn't now mean that every single time you have a conversation with somebody, it's going to take you like 2 minutes to think of what to say, because you have to process all this stuff, and then you just start thinking about the fact that you're thinking about it and you get all tied up. It doesn't really work like that. Again, we kind of internalize these things, so we become more sophisticated communicators almost by second nature, right? But it starts with us being really intentional about it. So that's the rhetorical situation part. The slightly more difficult, because it's really sort of an amorphous thing, the concept to get that's a little more challenging, but that's actually less important, I would say, than that rhetorical situation, is this notion of discourse communities. So again, it's a really fluid concept. We're immersed in multiple of these all the time, and sometimes they're really formal, they're well-defined, they have a clear set of rules by which they communicate, like expectations, but sometimes they're really informal, and sometimes those two things overlap. And what we'll discover in Unit 2 is that it's often only when the kind of implied rules or the expectations for how people would communicate within a discourse community, it's only when those rules are broken that we all of a sudden realize, oh, so the reverse of what I'm seeing now is actually the rule or the expectation that I had. Pardon me. The other thing to think about in terms of discourse communities is that because they're sometimes so challenging to like visualize, they're so fluid, they're dynamic, they're changing all the time, they're overlapping, they can sometimes be useful to think about in terms of a particular genre. In other words, like a mode of communication that discourse community tends to use. So the whole range of Twitter users is a discourse community. It's honestly so big that to do anything with it, you would have to sort of break that down. But obviously they use the tweet as the main genre of communication, and there's certain like rules and guidelines. Again, not just literal stuff like the character count that you're limited to, but especially as we would look at particular smaller discourse communities within that huge one, there's certain like topics to talk about, ways of saying things, ways of not saying things. And again, the one that we're going to deal with in our course is the professional email. It's a very particular genre. It has its own set of rules or expectations. So it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to kind of imagine that as a genre. So you, as the rhetor, are going to invent or create a rhetorical situation to be a part of. It's not going to be pretend or made up, but you're going to discover it, or maybe uncover it's a better word. And then you are going to participate in the discourse community of the professional email. And again, we're going to get into all of the specifics of that as we work through our class here. But I wanted to make sure we had a really kind of like 30,000 foot view, the big picture view of the really important concepts for 1102, and then how we're going to sort of apply them as we go, and ultimately what I'm hoping you take away in, honestly, just a couple of weeks once we're done with our class. So I'm going to jump into Unit 2 here, where we have a bunch of stuff going on. Okay, so we're first going to do some background research on the genre, or the mode, of the professional email. Again, like I talk about here, it's its own very narrowly defined genre. It's not just email. It's clearly not a written letter, which is right related but different. It's not a text message. And in fact, if you've ever heard the complaint that, oh, kids can't write these days, or students can't write, or whatever, totally untrue. In fact, studies show, that's a fun phrase to throw in there every once in a while, that most traditional age students, in fact, most people generally, are actually writing way more than they ever had, thanks to social media and all the other digital tools that we have available to us. It's just we're not writing like 5-page formal written letters like they might have 50 or 100 years ago. So we're actually doing way more writing as a society, right, than ever before. It's just not in super traditional formats. So the thing that I would agree with is not that, students can't write, is that sometimes people, just generally, make mistakes about applying the genre conventions, right, the expectations for one genre, like a text message, to another genre, the professional email. So I even get these all the time, and I don't expect your emails to me to be like professional emails. They can be a lot more informal. Well, a little bit more informal. And notice too that the way that you're going to communicate with me via email might change from the very beginning of the class, where you might err on the side of being a little more formal because we don't know each other, we're not that connected through the class yet. But fast forward 3 weeks, and it might be a totally different story. So even something like the rhetorical situation between you as the sender of an email, the email itself, and then me as the audience, even that might shift over time because our sort of relationship changes over time. Anyway, the mistake that I see most often is people will send me an email that reads like a text that they wrote to a friend. Hey, what's due tomorrow? Like, okay, whatever. I don't know who it is. I don't know what class. I don't know any of the context. So it's not that the person can't write. It's, to my very first point about the important concepts here, it's that that person is not really being intentional or thoughtful about, okay, what's the rhetorical situation that I'm in? Who am I as the rhetor, the creator of the message in this situation? What's the thing I'm creating? And it's not a text. It's more of a formal email to a professor I don't really know who's kind of learning about me through that email. And obviously, right, who's the professor? Do I know him that well? What's the sort of tone that he or she has struck in other communication, like this, for example, or other parts of the class? Does it seem like someone who'd be really demanding of a super professional email? I wouldn't. I'm more interested that the person who's emailing me is conscious of the fact that maybe I don't know who they are yet. Maybe I don't know what, like, quote unquote, assignment they might be talking about. I need some of that context. I don't need like a super professional, perfect grammar kind of a thing. But anyway, you get the idea. So here we are, we're going to start our research on the professional email. I'm just going to invite you to do a Google search. We're not going to worry about finding so-called academic sources. I think that is a really problematic kind of concept that's almost like a holdover from the days gone by when when the web was much less useful for finding credible information. It's not that the web doesn't have like lots of junk out there still, but it also has lots of really credible, professionally produced stuff. So there's no reason we can't go there. Again, it's not like web is bad, library is good kind of a thing, or students can write, students can't write kind of a thing. It's more like, is the student practicing good information literacy to decide, okay, I've done this Google search. In half a second, it's produced 50 million results or whatever it finds. Can I now use my skills to decide, okay, which are the good results and which are the junky ones that I should avoid? We're going to do that by applying the credibility test. And I've borrowed this language from the COD library, so you can find the whole thing there. But it's basically like looking at currency. Is the information you're finding relatively recent? And again, depending on the topic, these various categories are going to matter differently. If I was researching Shakespeare, maybe I don't need the latest 2019 stuff on Shakespeare. If I'm doing stuff on health, or even I would say like professional communication, I really do want to find something that's not from like 1998, or something that, not old exactly, but it doesn't reflect modern technology and maybe modern business practice. Reliability, right? Again, kind of self-explanatory. Is it just clearly false or wrong? Are there citations or references that you could look up? Who's the author, the publisher, like who's taking responsibility for this? Is there an author named, or an entity, like a corporate entity, like a magazine or an editorial group or a business of some kind? And then what's the purpose? And this is a really good one, because on the surface, everything you find is likely just going to be informational. It's going to tell you about the professional email. And that's where you kind of have to look at the rest of the website, the stuff that isn't the particular article or, you know, little posting that you found. Is the purpose to really advertise the junk on the side? Is it to sell some larger book that this is excerpted from, so they're really not giving you the full picture? So you really have to dig below just the surface of, okay, this thing is just giving me information about professional emails, but what is the larger purpose of it existing on the web? And is it, in your estimation, reliable, right? Can I trust the purpose of this thing? Or is it pretending to be informational, but it's actually doing something else? And so you want to be sort of questioning that. So we're going to start by finding 10 of these sources. Sounds like a lot. We'll get to them as we get to them. And again, Google produces so many of these. And honestly, most of what we'll find is like a page or a couple. So it's not like every single thing you find is going to be 5, 10, 15 pages long on the professional email. Writing for the web, right, understanding that genre, means that people who are writing effectively are going to keep it short, not pages and pages and pages. So we're going to find 10. Make a list of the 10. You can actually use the document that you're going to create down here to make that list. You don't need to do anything with the list or with the list just yet, other than to list the sources, include the title, URL, really just an easy way to get back to it. You're going to apply the credibility test like I just talked about to all 10 of those sources. Again, it's almost hopefully going to become second nature. You're just reading for these various things. And now we're going to go on to the assignment below that's right here. Okay. So starting a new Google Doc. Again, this can be the one that you use to just list your 10 sources. Make sure you've set the sharing correctly so I can get to it and ideally comment on it if I need to. You're just choosing 2 of those 10, the ones that you thought were most credible, most helpful, most applicable, taught you the most, right? You get the idea. And now we're going to annotate this to start building out our annotated bibliography. So a bibliography is just a list of sources. It's not ones that we're necessarily going to quote from. It's just providing background research for us. And we're going to annotate each of those sources, or at least 2 to start out with. Annotation here means just writing a paragraph that is pretty much straight summary. What's in the article? Why is it useful? You're not really critiquing it, like if there were mistakes. Like if there's mistakes, then you shouldn't have chose it for the two that you want to talk about. So the annotation is really as much just reporting on the source as possible, maybe with a slight indication as to why it stood out to you as the most valuable. It was easily readable, it was laid out nicely, it had good examples, whatever. Make sure that your annotation is not just a surface level sort of like overview of the article restated in a whole bunch of different ways. Make sure that you dive down and actually quote from the article. Provide examples of the things that you found were useful in that article. So again, you're going to be quoting from each of the articles or the sources that you're using here. We want to make sure that our bibliography is done in correct MLA formatting. Not that MLA is the only citation style, but it's the one that would apply for this particular rhetorical situation, so that's the one we're going to use. There's some sources here. There's some stuff, again, like I just said, about how to annotate. Make sure that each of your annotations is about 150 to 200 words. That's fairly robust. Again, make sure you're quoting, providing examples. That's how you're going to get to that word count without just repeating what you've said, 5 times over, 10 times over. No reply component, but we're going to now do the next assignment. Unit 2 is a big one, which is sort of like what I'd said before, uncovering our expectations for certain rhetorical genres. In this case, again, the professional email. There's a couple of examples of emails that I've received, and your job is, again, to start a new Google Doc. We're going to do a new thing here, title it this. The email is here. And then in your document, you can even copy the image into your doc just for ease of reference. You are going to talk about this in terms of its rhetorical, it as a rhetorical situation, right? You're going to uncover at least 5 red flags that lead you to believe, and I'm just going to tell you, this one is spam. It should be no surprise. But what leads us to believe that? So it's actually the unmet expectations for the professional email that sort of break the rules here that leads us to believe that this is not a legit email, right? So we uncover some of the expectations we have for a professional email, not by finding those expectations met, but by finding them unmet, kind of a reverse situation, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And now you're going to do it for the one above, this one, and now you're going to choose from one of the 2 options below and basically do the same thing. I'm not going through all of the exact requirements here, the 5 reasons, but you can read through that as we go. Okay. You're going to post your results here, your document, to the discussion board, the URL to your discussion board, and there is a reply component. So now you're going to read what others have said and reply back using the Blackboard discussion board tool, right, linked here. And then to round out Unit 2, which has been a really, pretty intense one, especially relative to Unit 1, you're going to build out your portfolio, the website that you started for yourself in Unit 1, by adding some new pages. Again, walking you through it, reminding you of what to add. So as we go, we're going to collect all our stuff. Okay, super long announcement here, video, hopefully walking you through, again, some big picture stuff for our whole course and some of the specifics for Unit 2, which has us doing a lot of different things, but clearly all related to those main overarching concepts and goals that we've got. Just a quick reminder about due dates as I sign off here. So we finished up Unit 1. There might be, depending on when you're watching this, some time for the replies here, Friday, May 31st. And then we're launching into Unit 2, where you have that Thursday, Friday due date. Again, all the main work for all of the assignments in Unit 2 is due that Thursday, and then any reply components due on that Friday. So especially past Unit 2, we are into the course. We don't want any problems with navigation or how the due dates work or this, that, and the other. So especially if you're still kind of fumbling around a little bit. And of course, if you have questions about the content as well, by all means, be in touch with me and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. I'll also check in with everybody in a few days.